This is a 2007 Ferrari F430 Spider, and it's just an excellent car. It's a lot more reliable than most older Ferrari models, and you don't have to remove the engine to service it. It's also a lot faster than most older Ferrari models as well, but it's a lot cheaper than most newer Ferrari models, which can really cost a fortune. This thing is a great value, and it's a great bargain for a Ferrari, and today I'm going to give you a quick review of it. I've borrowed this 430 Spider from CNC Motors, which is an exotic car dealership here in Southern California that has basically everything. Just walking into their showroom is better than most car shows I've been to. You can check out their inventory by clicking the link in the description below, and you should, because it's truly impressive. Now, I've already reviewed the 430 Scuderia on my main channel. That's sort of the high performance version of the F430, but I wanted to talk about the regular F430 here on More Doug DeMuro, because this car is becoming something of an excellent value, and it's very much worth considering if you're interested in buying, for instance, your first Ferrari. Consider this: the 430 Spider has just under 500 horsepower, and it'll do 0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds, which is monstrously fast, even by modern standards. But it's not all that expensive. This one is listed for around $140,000 because it's a 2007 Spider model with really low miles. But if you're willing to look at coupes from the F430's first year, 2005, you can easily find them for around $100,000 or less. Now, that's not cheap, of course, but it's still less than a third of what a brand new Ferrari 488 costs, and yet this thing has excellent performance by modern standards, and it's a Ferrari. So today I'm going to show you just a few of my favorite quirks and features of the F430, then I'm going to get behind the wheel and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. Now, since this review is here on More Doug DeMuro and not my main channel, I'm only going to show you a few of the interesting quirks. You can check out that 430 Scuderia review for a more in-depth look. In this video, I'm going to focus mostly on the interior. Now, this is a beautiful interior. This car, absolutely gorgeous, looks like it has basically no wear. There's a lot of carbon fiber stuff, and there are some rather interesting items. One is the fact that the glove box does not have a latch like in most cars. Instead, there's a little square button to the left of the glove box that says open. You push it and then the glove box glides ever so gently open so that you can use it. It also reveals a very beautiful pen holder with the same gorgeous leather and gorgeous stitching as the rest of the interior. That's an odd touch considering it's hidden and no one will ever see it. And speaking of hidden storage items in this car, here's an unusual one. In the center console, there are two switches. One is for the roof, which I'll show you in a second, and the other, there's like a file folder. So what does that do? Well, you push it and it opens up this little hidden storage compartment between the two seats. I never knew that storage compartment existed in the 430 Spider, but it does, and if you have one of these, that's where you hide stuff. And speaking of hiding stuff, how about the fact that Ferrari has hidden the passenger airbag turning off thing, in case you want to put a child in this car, over on the side of the dashboard. They didn't want to clutter the beautiful interior with that ugly piece, so they stuck it over there. You can't even see it when the door is closed. I suspect most 430 owners probably don't even know that they have that there. Two other odd hidden items in this car. The steering wheel looks like a fairly normal steering wheel. Engine start button is on it. The center is rather large, but it doesn't contain the horn. Instead, the horn is contained in these little thumb pads along the steering wheel rim, which is rather odd, but not that odd if you know where Ferrari went after this when they put not only the horn, but also the turn signals and the windshield wipers and all the other stuff along the steering wheel so you don't have to remove your hands from it. Still, very strange to see the horn there. Another strange item, and one that I can't explain, this car has power seats, and on the seat controls you can see the bottom is unlabeled, and the side to control the seat back, it has a picture of a seat back on it, which makes no sense because when you're sitting in the seat, you can't see that diagram. Even stranger than that, though, is if you look closely, it's a picture of a seat back with like an icon of a house. So if you push it that way, it goes into its house? I don't. Next up, I want to move on to the infotainment system in this car. it is a very primitive unit. Almost everybody who has an F430 removes the factory radio and puts in something more modern, but this one still has the factory radio, which even has a factory navigation system, despite the fact that it's this incredibly tiny screen and it's not even multicolor. As you can imagine, the navigation system doesn't work all that well. I'm going to now set it to go somewhere, and you can see exactly what the 2007 Ferrari navigation system was like. One funny thing about that infotainment system is that despite the fact that it's clearly very old and very limited in its function, it comes with an owner's manual this large. It is massive. In fact, the owner's manual for the infotainment system is larger than the owner's manual for the entire rest of the car. I have no idea why it has so much of an infotainment owner's manual, because it can't do all that much. It's so stupid. But nonetheless, it's here. So even though I said this car was modern, there are obviously some old school things, and that isn't the only one. How about the fact that the center control stack doesn't like finish? It just stops, and then there's this big carpeted hole in the middle until you get to the center console. This was a complaint I had with the 360 as well. I don't know why they didn't just finish the center control stack and have it be one cohesive unit so it actually looked nice, but they didn't. So there's this giant carpeted hole in the middle of your Ferrari. It's bizarre. Two other very old school items in this car. One is the fact that when you put on the turn signals, you put on the left turn signal, the left blinker doesn't light up in the gauge cluster. Instead, both of them do. Same deal with the right one, both light up. Now, in old cars, this was common. You'd put on the turn signal and it would just let you know that a turn signal is on. But modern cars obviously let you know that either your left or your right signal is on. I actually think the 430 was the very last car that didn't let you know which specific turn signal it was on. That is very old school. And so is this little screen in the middle of the tachometer that lets you know if a door is open. It is a ridiculous interpretation of how an F430 would look if you only had like 11 pixels to use in order to show a diagram of this car. It's really funny to see that now in the age of LCD screens and entire gauge cluster screens, that this was considered modern only 10 years ago. And with that, it's time to see how the roof works in the F430 Spider, and then I'm gonna get it out on the road and drive it. Wait, before I go drive it, one other quick thing. Take a look at what that gauge cluster screen is showing while the top is going up and down. Once again, it's like a 1970s computer drawing of a Ferrari if someone gave you 8 pixels and said, make a Ferrari. All right, driving the 430 Spider. I gotta say, the interior of this car still looks pretty cool. It's not the most modern with this giant hole in the middle, which is annoying to me, but it is cool. It looks really cool. The leather is really cool. This one has a ton of carbon fiber options, makes it look really neat. I remember when this was a new car, I was working at a Ferrari dealer, and when one of these came in, it was the coolest thing in the world. And you know, it still is a pretty neat car. And the coolest thing about it, I think, is the fact that it has modern performance. It feels fast. Good. A lot of people tell you they prefer the coupe, and there's a lot of reasons to prefer the Coupe, one of which is they're just cheaper. You get a similar experience, but with the convertible, you get to hear it. Now this old school F1 transmission is kind of clunky at low speeds. Everybody generally agrees about that now, but at higher speeds, it's totally fine. And one trick is if you let off the throttle while you're accelerating, if you let off the throttle when you pull the paddle to go to the next gear, it makes it a little bit smoother, and supposedly it preserves your clutch life as well. The ride is surprisingly harsh. The last 430 I drove was a Scuderia. That was really rough. This isn't as much more comfortable as I was thinking it would be. This car also handles great. It's really well balanced, although one of my complaints about this car was always that I felt the steering was a little too light. It's kind of a problem in general on modern Ferraris since the 355. But the balance of the chassis is absolutely fantastic. Obviously a mid-engine car, physics are on your side, and it's a really, really well-balanced car. Corners flat. The downside of that is you do have a rough ride. This is definitely not a daily car. If you want an open-top daily Ferrari for this price range, California, the early ones are starting to get into this range, and that's also a fantastic car. This car is more fun and more exciting than I remember. You know, a 430 is now just in the Ferrari world just sort of a used car, right? It hasn't attained classic status yet like the 355 is starting to, and yet it's not as hot and new like 458 and 488. So people have kind of forgotten about it to an extent. But you get in it again and it's still a lot of fun. It's a really exciting and enjoyable car. It has enough power to still be fun by modern standards. And so that's the Ferrari F430 Spider. This car isn't cheap, but it's still a really good value, especially compared to newer Ferrari models. Yeah, the F1 transmission isn't great and the technology isn't very modern, but the price is good, the performance is excellent, and reliability is really strong. This is an excellent car, and now it's time to give it a Doug score. And the Doug score is 64 out of 100. Compared to rivals, the F430 Spider finishes exactly where you'd expect it to, tied with probably its closest rival, the Porsche 997 Turbo, and ahead of the Porsche in the weekend categories, but behind it in the daily categories. It's the opposite compared to the 430 Scuderia, the high-performance version of the F430, which is the easy winner in the weekend categories, but the Scuderia is so brutal that the Spider beats it out overall.